Got an email from our education affairs correspondent I want to share with you. It's really nice, and I wanted to start the program with Kay's email because I'm just so sick of talking about this garbage mouth asshole that's the president. Hi, Mike and Kathy. Julian Castro's comment, I guess during the debates, about the United States needing to implement a new Marshall Plan got me and my mom thinking. Specifically, it was about the issue of children in detention centers not having access to basic necessities, including toothpaste, that struck us. My mom was born in Stuttgart, Germany, same city where Chris Shaper lives, during the early years of World War II. Because Stuttgart was a major industrial center, my mom's earliest memories are of sirens blaring and running to the bomb shelter. When the war ended in 1945, my mom was 6 years old. As you know, the Allies divided Germany into four zones of occupation, and Stuttgart fell into the American sector. The people in the American sector considered themselves fortunate compared to those living in the French, British, and Russian sectors. Those countries had been devastated by the war, so there were very few resources, and I would imagine not much motivation, to help Germany get back on its feet. In contrast, the United States had entered its economic boom period, and Germans living in the American sector benefited from this. My mom has a distinct memory, or has distinct memories, plural, of the Marshall Plan, specifically of something called Hoover lunches. One day, a couple of years after the end of the war, my mom was in school. It was a Saturday, a minimum day. In pre war times, this meant that kids could go home and eat lunch there. This presented a problem in post war Germany where food was scarce. President Truman understood this, and he wrote to former President Herbert Hoover asking him to spearhead a relief effort. Truman wrote, quote, "Last year you made a trip around the world at my request to report on food needs at a time of critical shortage. The result was most helpful in meeting the acute problems which confronted us. World conditions this year are not nearly as threatening, but a serious situation in food still exists in certain places, particularly those in Europe occupied by our forces, and for which we, therefore, have a direct responsibility. I should, therefore, like to ask you to undertake this economic mission as to food and its collateral problems and report to me upon it." Hoover accepted the assignment and, quote, devised a program. In April 1947, Herbert Hoover's plan began to take shape in the form of school meal programs in the Allied zone. The plan called to feed more than 3 million children and teenagers. A total of 40,000 tons of American food were made available for the project. End quote. My mom, Kay writes, loved those Hoover lunches. She remembers that they would usually contain peanut butter, crackers, an apple, or any number of other goodies. To this day, my mom loves peanut butter. One Saturday, there was a little tube included in the lunchbox. My mom opened it and smelled peppermint. Sweets had been a rarity during the war, so my mom was really excited to have some candy. As she walked home, my mom ate the peppermint and thoroughly enjoyed it. When my grandmother saw the empty tube, she asked my mom, "Marianne, what did you do with this?" My mom replied, "I ate it. It was peppermint and it tasted so good." Grandma responded, "Do you know that you just ate a tube of toothpaste?" My mom had had no clue. During the war, people brushed their teeth with baking soda. There was no peppermint flavored toothpaste. This story never fails to make my students laugh. It also shows them the important humanitarian role that the United States played in post war Germany. Nazi Germany had been the enemy of the American of the United States. The devastation caused by the Nazi regime was global. And yet the American government made the decision not only to help rebuild German infrastructure, but to provide basic necessities, including toothpaste, to German children like my mother. This brings me back to Julian Castro's remark about a new Marshall Plan. While I agree with this proposition, I think we need to begin closer to home. Today, the American government will not provide basic food, clothing, shelter, and yes, toothpaste to children suffering on the southern border. These are children fleeing countries that have done no harm to Americans. In fact, it's the opposite. From the Marshall Plan in 1948 to the Trump crime syndicate in 2019, it didn't take long, did it? We now have a so-called leader who is far removed from the humanitarian ideals of President Truman and Hoover, and in fact has much more in common with the leader of our former enemy, Nazi Germany. What the fuck has happened to this country? K. P.S. The ongoing joke with my mom is that when we arrive at our friends' homes for dinner, they always yell, "Quick, hide the toothpaste! Mary Ann is here!" Great story. Sad, poignant, deliberate, revealing, and a great story. Yeah, I agree with Kay. What has happened to this country? Unbelievable.